showing that the graph will start picking up at 2050 for Africa. And in a sense, I think I've seen several papers that are looking into this. In 2008, there was still a projection or a forecast showing that Kenya itself, for example, will actually achieve a demographic dividend in 2050. But somehow, we may need to come back and reinvest. I will look at the numbers again. Because we made an assumption that there will be, mortality rates will be declining, and so it means that the health indicators will be improving. But just, if you look at just that alone, if you look at the last 3-4 years, what has happened in Africa, it's actually devastating even to look at the health indicators. For example, the COVID-19, the second, the devastating climate change and drought has actually reversed the efforts of poverty reduction and even inequality to the last, perhaps just taken us like 20 years back. In a sense, you're actually saying the investment in those areas, especially in health indicators, is actually challenged. That's one. The second thing is that we anticipated that there will be better nutrition outcomes. But you can see when you talk about nutrition and poverty, you actually are showing that something somehow in this decade, the starting of this decade, we are challenged. And that is the anticipation that the dependency rate would decline so that there will be massive employment. And so the people who are young and old, as a proportion in terms of the total, the labor force will be like just greater than that. And so it means that we can actually ask ourselves, is the timing correct now? But let me say, what is it that creating my impression that there is pessimism in achieving this demographic dividend? First, let me say that just like Andrew, for me, I'm very concerned about institutional quality. Going forward, and even if you look at the last 20 years, the institutional quality in African countries, you can actually talk about actually declining institutional quality. The second thing is availability of productive employment. We have had several programs working with, for example, Latin America and even the Brookings, looking at even the youth unemployment. What may have happened? But what may have happened is that the youth unemployment comes in because there is a missing middle here. I looked at African economies for the last couple of years, and I could see that there was a massive expansion of primary school education and secondary school education and high school education. That's at the university level. In fact, today, there is a premium for you having a degree to the point where the crooked guys buy one because there is a premium for the degree. But what happened in some countries is that they destroyed the middle. That is the technical and vocational training, the TVET. We call it the TVET. In a sense that you get to the university, you don't get a job, and then if you went to a TVET, you would actually get to, and the majority of the people are dropping out. That is what I'm calling the missing middle. And we have to go back and ask ourselves, how can we reverse this? I've seen that, for example, in Kenya, they have started amnesty to reduce this. Because this is something that could have helped us in terms of focusing on the 2050 in terms of the demographic dividend. Actually, this is also something that we have covered with Brookings and wider. We studied 7 countries. We call them the 7 African lions. And we wanted to show that these countries have the potential to lead the way, but they are not leading the way. What is happening? And the summary point is also consistent with what Andrew has explained. What is happening to the institutions? What is happening to their markets? And what is happening to the Human Capital Development Index in terms of the way we anticipate it would go? And this is quite consistent with what we're saying. So the picture I'm painting is actually to show exactly what is happening. Let me stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ndungu. And I want to come back to 2 of your themes when we come back to the next round. This question of pessimism in the demographic dividend and also vocational training in connection to labor markets. But first I'd like to, since you're talking a lot about the increase in investments in education, is turn now to Mr. Sadie, talk about the quality of learning. Because yes, Africa, like much of the developing world, has made enormous progress in sending more children to school and building more schools. Unfortunately, the quality of education remains low across much of the continent, which lowers the human capital impacts of education. And of course, the learning loss during the pandemic further adds to that problem. How can countries improve their education systems to improve the quality of education? And how can digital technologies and platforms be used to improve student learning and to better prepare them for the future world of work? Mr. Sadie?
Thank you, Ian. Good morning, everyone. Very delighted to be here. Let me start with three very important things, very simple, that need to happen for the quality that you talked about to happen. First, you need to have teachers that are well trained that show up in school. And then you have children who are learning that also show up. And the third element is having the right curriculum. Now, these three things seem very, very simple, but unfortunately, they do not always happen. Today, 9 out of 10 boys and girls cannot actually read by the time that they reach age 10. And I insist on the word cannot. And that's in sub-Saharan Africa. In contrast, if you look at high-income countries, 9 out of 10 children can, and that's the difference, read by the time that they reach age 10. And this is where the problem begins. And this is why we are very focused on starting with the base. A lot of things can be fixed later on, but we strongly believe that it starts at the primary school level. And this is where foundational learning is critical in terms of trying to make sure that you have the quality that you need at that base, and then you use that base going forward. And as you think about that quality, I just want to talk about 3 proven solutions that we are advocating in terms of making sure that that quality is there. It starts with structured pedagogy, where you have an approach that enables you and help teachers to have the right kind of training and also the right materials in the classroom. And then the next thing is making sure that you have differentiated instruction. So you could have children in the classroom being in the same grade, but not necessarily at the same level in the different topics that they look into. And this is where you have to have programs that are catered by level so that they can learn the right way and grow as they learn. And the third element is remediation. And this was particularly acute during the COVID time when you need additional instructions, additional time for those children who are left behind, who were not able to be in a classroom when they were supposed to actually have that opportunity. And a lot of this is documented in the book, the Smart Buys report, which was put together by a number of experts who were looking at just some of these basic things that you need to do in order to enhance the quality of learning. And then on the second part of the question that you were asking, educational technology, which we call EdTech. Now, to be realistic, I want to use the word can. So it can actually make a difference, particularly when we talk about the issues of accessibility, of affordability, and quality, which are some of the basic barriers that we found in the field of education. And I use the word can simply because it does depend on the kind of infrastructure you have. Because today, very clearly, because of the fact that the smartphones, tablets, and other means are more available than they used to, it allows and makes it more possible to reach the communities that are basically remote communities and the ones that are not very easy to reach. And so that's the future. To the extent that those are put in place, it allows for scaling and to reduce the significant gap I've been talking about. So I'll stop here and hand it over back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Sidi. Minister Abudu, I'd like to turn to you now, and I'm so glad you're here with us today from Ghana. And I'd like to ask you about women's empowerment and outcomes. The already low investment in human capital is even lower for girls and women, which is reflected in lower educational outcomes during adolescence and beyond, in lower labor market outcomes throughout women's working lives, and often in reduced agency and voice in their homes and societies. What can countries do to improve these outcomes for women in Africa?
Thank you for having me, and all protocol observed. I want to limit myself in 3 key points: education, health, and entrepreneurial skills for women. Why education? Education is the bedrock of every life in any country. One philosophy says, if you educate a man, you educate an individual. But if you educate a woman, you educate the whole nation. And I cannot testify in this room that all the women that are in this room are well educated and they are still learning. Learning is a process, everyday process. If you are educating the girl child, educate them. You don't have to limit it. It's a process and experience. We are here. A lot of women are going to gain experience. I'm going to gain experience from my colleagues, and that will help me translate into my country. Another key point, let's make education accessible to all, no matter your disability, no matter who you are. And in Ghana, the government have introduced a lot of school growing activities that retain children in school, especially the school feeding exercise that we are doing, which has targeted 3.8 million students. And it has given jobs to 30,800 caterers. And these caterers buy the food from the farm gate, and the farmer has also benefited. Economically, women have been empowered. So it is something other countries can look at. The free senior high school, where everybody's in school, you don't pay fees, you are given laptops, you are given bags, you are given everything for free. So now we have a lot of girls in school, as well as boys in school. So we have to build on an introduction of innovation technologies. Now it has come to stay. We need to introduce ICT in our schools. So if you look at Ghana, we have opened ICT labs in most of the schools, and we have also opened science schools that we call the STEM school, that every region have a STEM school. And in most cases, they are only girls that attend those schools. So definitely, we'll have the nurses, we'll have the midwives, we'll have the doctors, and we'll have the nutritionists from those schools. So other countries too can leverage on that. We should also look at registry. We should target registry that will give us data for the poor girls. And this can formulate policies for government to subsidize whatever their needs are. So let's use the registry data to emphasize on women empowerment. Health, reproduction, let's look at that one too. What do we do? At the early stage, the child needs to be taught about reproductive system, how it works. The adult needs to be taught when she starts the conception period, how the body changes, and devices. Also, let's look at the old age. When we grow old, our hormonal system changes in us. You have the hot flash, you have your hair coming out, and in some African countries, people term it to be witchcraft. And these are targeting the vulnerable women. And this will not yield to productivity. So we need to also train all these women to know about changes in their body. And we also have to bring education to the doorstep of the people, where we have to build more schools. We have to move away from theory and look at the practical aspect of teaching. China, they have developed because the people are taught practically. They feel it, they touch, they use it, and they produce something. Africans should look at that and also emulate those things. Our healthcare system should also be brought to the doorstep of our communities, where at least a woman pregnant will not, especially somebody who has no the money to travel to bigger city, will have access to health facility within their locality. Then let's also try to educate people on harmful practices in our communities. Where a woman is pregnant and they say you don't have to go to hospital because they will say it's not for your husband, it's for somebody. So they turn to the traditional birth attendants, and later on they have issues. But in Ghana, we have trained the traditional birth attendants and have given them kits so that if the women come there and they are able to deliver them, they will refer them back to hospital for more access. Entrepreneurial skills, the TVET, where technology is being taught, skills are being taught in schools. In my area, I've realized that a lot of girls who go to the vocational training and are taught fashion designing, clothing, pastries and all those, when they come out, they don't wait for the formal job. They start business on their own. So before they get other jobs or they continue their education, they have been empowered with some funding. So we have to leverage on entrepreneurial skills and also educate a lot of women on that. A lot of women go through practice like you don't owe a land. How do we leverage on that? I think women in this room can testify that me and you can own lands. We can own our husband because we are educated, and nobody would fault us for that. So education is key in building a human capital outcome. I will leave it here and wait for more questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Minister Buddha. Dr. Kaberuka, I'd like you to address the issue of human capital and productivity. And there are two parts to the question. How can we effectively invest in human capital development to enhance productivity and economic growth in today's rapidly changing and technologically advanced world? And second, what policies or strategies can be implemented to bridge the skills gap and promote lifelong learning opportunities, ensuring that individuals have the necessary capabilities to adapt to evolving job requirements and contribute to productivity going forward?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ian. Good morning, colleagues. First of all, let me say that the presentation by the Chief Economist was excellent. It raised all the issues, so thank you. But also, colleagues have made points here which I agree with, so I don't have to repeat them, because I agree with all of them. I just have a couple of points to make, and I'll be brief. The Chief Economist pointed to China in the way they have got everything right. I actually think the best example for us here in Africa is not even China. It is another small country, the south of Ethiopia, and that is Vietnam. So to give you an idea, the GDP of Vietnam in 1993 was just about $14 billion, $14 billion. The GDP of Vietnam today is just about $500 billion. $500 billion, from 14 to 500 in 30 years. Now, we can decide what has happened there, but those of you who are my age will remember images in the late 70s and the early 80s of people who are called the Vietnamese boat people. Do you remember? They were fleeing Vietnam in rickety boats, trying to get to Australia. Like some people try to cross the Mediterranean. It was the same. And that is not a long time ago. I was at school. But look, they've gone from 14 billion to $500 billion. Now, if you look at what is the secret, it's exactly the chief economist what he was saying. The way they invest in human capital, plus attracting foreign direct investment. If you look at the structure of the exports of Vietnam, you'll find that about 40% of all the Samsung products are made in Vietnam. So, human capital, and you attract FDI, foreign direct investment. And so, what have they done to attract FDI? That is a question you have to answer. Human capital is one of them. But I was there about a month ago. I found also that they've reduced malaria incidence by almost 70%. Malaria in a tropical country by 70% because of investing in basic health systems. Nothing very sophisticated. They've taken a huge advantage of digital. And also, luckily for them, they have relatively cheap energy. But the key issue has been human capital and attracting foreign direct investment. Because that's how you create jobs. But here is an issue which we are not discussing enough, and I want you to, in the next 2 days, to take a careful look at it. Because foreign direct investment, we're all competing for it. But the first thing people will look at is how stable the countries are. Stability of the countries. Now, Latin America missed the demographic dividend. I don't know if Professor Njuguna maybe later can say about this. Why? It was a very unstable continent. Debt crisis, macroeconomic instability, political instabilities, and they missed it. All right? And so it is very important we link up all these things together. And I'm glad you are raising the issue of institutions, because good institutions mean stability. I am on another panel, Ian, set up by the Secretary General of the UN on the Sahel. There's 100 million people in the Sahelan countries. It's called the International Panel on Security and Development in the Sahel. Now, many of those countries in the Sahel have actually, not in the free trade area, they have the highest form of integration possible. One currency, one central bank. So even integration on its own is not adequate. It is the secular instability of the Sahel which makes it difficult to attract foreign direct investment, even when you have one currency or something below it, maybe a common market. And so it is vitally important that we invest in human capital, but also in the environment which will make these young people prosper, which will make investment to be attracted. I mentioned Vietnam, but I can mention a few other countries in that region where the GDP has multiplied almost at the same magnitude because they are getting the dividend right. Now, two more small points in. I don't know how to say this because one of them is a bit controversial, is that I think too many of our senior policymakers are too distracted by issues around natural resources. They are distracted by looking for oil, gas, diamond, cobalt, whatever it is. And I do believe that probably this policy destruction is in DI. I wish it was given to human capital development. Because in that case, actually even the issue of natural resource will be managed by the same people. But if the attention of leaders focus too much on these things under the soil, all right, there's less attention to the resource which matters most, which is, of course, human capital. Now, the final point, I think, is controversial, Ian, so I don't know how to say it. If you look at sub-Saharan Africa alone, a concept I don't like very much, by the way. I don't like it very much. It's an artificial artifact to divide Africa into south of the Sahara, north of the Sahara. But since in the World Bank, this is a concept you use, I hope you'll abandon it one day. because the countries I'm working on in the Sahel, a country like Mali, Niger, Chad, you never know, what are they? Because the word Sahel in Arabic, I live in Tunisia a bit, so I know a bit of Arabic. The word Sahel means a bridge, a border, a barrier. I hope my Arabophone friends here can correct me. I like to call it a bridge, but that's not the point. The point is that about 60% of all Africans live in about 6 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. 60%. So Mauritius can make progress, but how many are they? All right? But there are some big demographic densities where things will have to happen, because those are the engines. So the lack of Nigeria, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania here, South Africa, DRC, because these demographic densities are absolutely important, because they act as engines, as multipliers, but also they so can, I think, make progress. So I'm optimistic, because everything to be done has been said, whether it is quality education, health systems, all that we know. We should just care about and do it. However, it is important that if the free trade area were very hard working to make sure it succeeds, we create also a stable, peaceful institution which can attract foreign direct investment from countries who have got surplus capital. Now, there's one thing the chief economist could have said, but I'm going to say it for him. Please forgive me. You see, because of those demographics in the world, the countries we call the global north, they have got a glut of savings. Savings are accumulating. A country like Japan, even if the central bank puts interest at -3, the savings are increasing because of demographic shifts. But they are looking for a return. Now, that return cannot be available in countries like ours. This is what the return is. All right? So, on one side, there's a glut of savings, very low returns, because of what they perceive to be the risk for us in the global south. So, the combination of making sure we have got stable environments, macroeconomic stability, political stability, is precisely to reduce the risk, which will enable us to attract the savings as investment to create jobs arising from this demographic dividend, which, by the way, lasts for a very short period of time. It goes away in about 40 years. So you have to catch it before it disappears. But thank you very much. These are my small contributions.
Thank you, Dr. Kaberuka. Since you came back to the demographic dividend, and it's one of the questions that Professor Ndungu had started with, I'd actually would like each of you to reflect for a moment on, are you optimistic or pessimistic about this dividend? If you're optimistic, why? And if you are pessimistic, what would have to change to make you optimistic? And Professor Ndungu, since you raised the question, I'm going to start with you, and then I'll go to Mr. Nkenda and go to... Actually, Professor Nkenda, you ready to start? Or do you want Professor Ndungu to answer his own question first?
Okay. I was wondering, because when you switched to green, it talks. Now it was refusing to do that. Thank you very much. And I can tell you about the optimism, because I do believe that listening to yesterday and today, we have every reason to say, look, don't anticipate that everything has been going on well. We have had this critical mind in terms of trying to understand what is really happening. But let me offer 2 factors for this optimism that I do have. First is, I do believe, and this is something that I've heard for a long time, that growing the middle class is the one that is going to help us in terms of reversing this trend, especially the demographic dividend, the peace dividend, and all the dividends that you can think about. And that is something that we believe that the institutional quality and functioning markets is going to support. It's going to boost that middle class. Let me say this. For example, the new administration in Kenya has emphasized bottom-up economic transformation agenda. We call it BETA. The whole issue is, why bottom up? Because so many people have been left behind and they have sunk into abject poverty. Why economic transformation? It's because capital accumulation, and that is consistent with what President Kaberuka has just said, the whole issue about capital accumulation is very, very important. And you can close the gap using, for example, foreign direct investment or even debt to try and grow the capital accumulation. But it has to get to thresholds that are going to ignite economic transformation. But we haven't managed to do that. That's why I'm saying the middle class is the one that can help us in terms of doing that. Why do I say this? First, they have a preference for peace. Second, they are the innovative group, and they are the investors at the domestic level. And of course, their consumption levels on average are much higher. And they are keen for markets to work. They are keen for markets to work because essentially, this is what I believe, that if markets are functioning, they are going to encourage growth, increased production and even productivity downstream, and especially for African farmers, smallholder farmers. And what you see upstream is actually increased incomes. That for me is a very, very critical factor, and is one basis of my optimism. The second one is actually going back to the drawing board in terms of nutrition, hunger, and even school feeding programs. Yesterday, we were presented with massive facts of showing that the first 1,000 days are very, very important for nutrition. But let's face it, African cities, arid and semi-arid areas, what they suffer most from is actually hunger. And I've seen that school feeding programs, in some cases where it has worked in Kenya, has actually increased enrollment rates in a very big percentage. So it means that will raise the enrollment, but it's also going to promote retention. Actually, urban poverty is actually pervasive in most African cities. And so it is a drag in terms of human capital development indicators. We believe that, but perhaps that's where there are incomes, but actually the poverty side is very, very important. I've seen studies that are linking school feeding programs to smart agriculture and to climate change. You can imagine that for itself, in terms of that linkage, is going to be very, very important. And that is why I'm actually saying that it offers some sense of optimism from my end. Those 2 points are very, very critical for me.
Thank you. Professor Mkenda.
Am I optimistic about Africa harnessing demographic dividend? I have qualified optimism, and a lot will depend on how we move forward from here. Sometimes we think it's just about the size of the market. Therefore, continental free trade area. Maybe size matters. How about Mauritius and Botswana in terms of population and the market size? And of course, Kaberuka said, well, I think sometimes we are focusing on natural resources, thinking that will take us forward. And then how about Korea, South Korea, and other countries? So let me digress and take a little bit of history very quickly and see the significance of this meeting and moving forward from here as Africa. It's commonplace to compare a country in Africa and a country in Southeast Asia in 1960s, Ghana, Tanzania, Kenya, and we look at the GDP and we find that they are almost at par. And that now we compare them and find that in terms of GDP, we are far apart. The problem with that comparison is a failure to look at differences in human capital accumulation at the baseline. What did they have in 60s in terms of human capital? Forget about the GDP. And how did they continue to invest and sustain high investment in human capital going forward? You cannot just compare two countries in terms of GDP. South Korea with thousands of years of statehood and also investments in human capital. So when we gained independence, there was that far cry, and I think it was Nkrumah who said, seek political kingdom first and everything will follow. And we recognize things like importance of education and health, dealing with poverty. Those were three key issues we were determined to address. So investments in education start to pick up. In Tanzania, for instance, we did not have a university. 1961, we gained independence, but we established quickly a university college in Dar es Salaam with 14 students. We start to build schools and try to have literacy rate for all the population. Going forward to 1980s with structural adjustments. I'm one economist, and I know Kaberuka is, and Professor Njuguna. But I'll talk about the World Bank. They came to us and say, return to education is so small, and therefore with the trickle-down economics, we should not waste too much time, resources in these activities that do not have high returns. We should reorganize the economy, and you lift the ship and all the boats will be lifted together. And we actually cut down on expenditure in education because we look at the returns to education. And the fallacy of that is that we are focusing on 2, 3, 4, a decade, years, instead of looking at intergenerational impact of capital accumulation that is the country like Korea and Taiwan had by 1960s when we tried to compare the two countries. When I talk to my colleagues from the World Bank, I say, when I see you focusing on human capital now, I'm so happy, and I know you're atoning for the sins of the World Bank bureaucrats in 1980s and Bretton Woods. If we leave this summit with a commitment to continue to invest in education and other dimensions of human capital and sustain that investment, I'll have reasons to be optimistic about harnessing demographic dividend. If we allow the pendulum to keep shifting left and right and left and right, I think optimism will be misplaced. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mkenda. Very, very powerful, and I appreciate the emphasis on intergenerational impact. We are very tight on time, so I'm going to offer the final three panelists, if they have a comment on their optimism or pessimism, very briefly, we'd love to hear it.
Hello. I think I want us to look at inter-country trade. Let's leverage on that, so that we can trade among ourselves within African countries. We can also look at exporting our human resources that we have within our various countries. If Tanzania needs nurses that Ghana can produce, why not? If Tanzania have doctors that Ghana need, why can't we do that? Intertrade women in mining, what percentage do we know? What is the data of women in mining? How do we train them in risk factors in mining sectors? So we have to look at all those things holistically and come out with African solutions. I'm also looking at, in Ghana, we have something that we call Livelihood Empowerment Against Poverty. That's the LEAP program. And this program actually targeted the extreme poor within our communities. And women are majority. And then on one of the payment sessions, I went with my officers And we met a woman who lost a husband, left her with 6 kids. 2 of the boys were taken by the uncle, leaving her with 4 of the girls. They were dropouts from school. So we enrolled her on the LEAP program. Then the first payment of cash transfer, she went and bought guinea fowl eggs from the community, stood by the roadside, and she was selling. Now, she's the biggest woman selling eggs in that community. And she has been able to send her children back to school. And the last time I met her, she said, do you know, I now have suitors. They are coming for me. But I say, I want to take care of my children first. I said, oh, why not look at one and pay? She said, no, when they come, they will take my capital and they will eat my eggs. So she has built herself, she has empowered herself economically. And she now knows her right. We need to provide laws to protect women in businesses, women, girls in school. We need to get laws that will protect them. So I would like to say, let's look at inter-country trade, where there shouldn't be barriers, where we can all trade within ourselves. The ECOWAS trade, we should emphasize on it, and also try to bridge the gap between women. I mean, looking at us sitting here, there's a gender disparity because only one woman against how many men? So we need to look at that. Always, women, let's pull our colleagues, women, along, and one day we'll be there. Thank you so much.
Final words from Dr. Kaberuka and Mr. Sadie.
So it is whether I'm optimistic or pessimistic.
Yeah, but,
no, I think we have no choice. That will be my answer. It is something we have to do. And here are my 2 reasons. How many people in this room would know that at the turn of the last century, 1900, actually, European population was bigger than the entire African population? Maybe that's why we're even colonized, because they were almost double our size. The numbers at the time around 1900 were around 150 million people, or thereabouts. And Europeans were more than us. Okay. But around 1950, numbers began to even, but African population bypassed the European around begin 2000. What is the importance of this? Is that throughout history, when you have had this kind of big demographic shifts, there are only 2 solutions. Solution number 1 is massive investment of the type I've been discussing to get to double-digit growth, to create jobs for the people. The second solution, historically again, is out-migration. How can you explain that 60% of Argentinians are Italians? It's because Italy was facing a huge demographic bulge, but there were no jobs for the Italians. So off they went. This is how they are in Argentina, 4 million of them in New York. Now, because of these issues around migration dynamics, it is most likely, as it is now, that a lot of African migrants will migrate to other African countries in the context of African single market. Hence the powerful point the chief economist was making about the importance of the free trade area. And so, for us, if this demographic dividend is not to disappear, we have to invest within our countries and also within the region. Now, just for somebody who is not from the field, I just have an offer, a thought here. One thing the Asians have done, Professor, is that they have not targeted so much input into education system. You know, gross enrollment. It is about learning outcomes all the time. They target learning outcomes. So, for example, if kids leave secondary school, they still don't have what it takes. That education continues even at work. And so I think where we can make a big impact on our education systems is to leverage digital. We never have enough teachers, but digital is available for all of us. Number 2, target outcomes so that the kids coming out of the education systems are able to take advantage of this dividend. But I agree with you, Professor. I think we have talked about these things far too much. We know what to do. We know what has to be done. And I think it is time just to get around and do it. That was makes me optimistic.
When you have a panel with a bunch of professors and PhDs, you learn a lot. It's like going to school. Mr. Sadie, I'm going to give you the last word.
Thank you. So, I am a development professional. I've been for a number of decades. I cannot afford to be pessimistic, particularly when I think about what is at stake and the prospects that I also see in where we're going. So we just need to make sure to watch that dependency ratio as we think about whether you want to leverage that demographic dividend. When I think about the availability of job platforms, the matching platforms that enables that potential to be leveraged. When I think about the prospects of the free trade agreement with roughly about 15 or 20% of intertrade, and just that gap that needs to be filled. When I think about, we were together at the Mo Ibrahim Summit governance when we read that report that was just giving a lot of information about our countries, with 6 of them being among the top, looking at the top 10, 6 of them being among the fastest growing countries, and then the growth prospects after that in the coming years. It's about leveraging those potentials and advocating and working hard to make sure that those potentials are there. And perhaps I'll end with one thing that has been, and it's very dear to my heart, and I think that we don't talk enough about. When I think about this world where, as we engage with our respective countries with the reduced fiscal space, there's a lot of conversation about just going back and asking for more money. And I think that that journey for self-reliance is important. And one of those, when I look at our debt situation, which makes it extremely difficult to put anything aside in order to leverage those potentials I'm talking about. And in that report, I remember talking about the total debt of sub-Saharan Africa being equivalent to what you have in just one country in Europe, which is Belgium. And then when you think about our countries in general, if your debt to GDP ratio is going north of about 60%, alarm bells start coming. And there are countries like Japan where it's over 200%, but never make the headlines simply because of their ability to go and finance themselves. And what I'm getting at is really the advocacy needed to really put the credit rating agencies at task. Yes, it is set by the market in terms of that. But if you look at disproportionately, that is something that is coming over and over again, where you go into debt restructuring and know that the next restructuring is just 4 years away. So this is an issue that also needs to be looked into. So in other words, my whole value proposition here is that there are things that gives us the potential to leverage in order to make that optimism a reality. Thank you.
Let's leverage the potential to achieve the qualified optimism of Professor Mkenda. Please join me in thanking this wonderful panelists. Thank you.
Can we give a bigger round of applause, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you so much, Mr. Solomon. As he had mentioned earlier, Solomon is Dean and Professor at the University of Virginia, Frank Burton School of Leadership and Public Policy. Thank you so much for that powerful moderation. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we are now going on to the next session where we're going to learn about connection between people and infrastructure and better human capital outcomes. Allow me now to bring to the podium Diebedo Francis Kere, founder of Kere Architecture and the Kere Foundation, who is also a Pritzker Prize winner in the architecture for the year 2022. As he comes to the stage, can we put our hands together? He's here. Karibu-san.
Good morning. Good morning. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this is my very first time to speak in front of an African minister. So, but now we have many of them here. So, please, if I am not too respectful, apologize myself. But I can tell you, I even spoke inside the Vatican. Yes, I did it. And so I'm standing in front of you with mixed feelings. I am home, but I don't know if, I will be respectful enough. So we have some problems with the clicker. We have heard today that in less than 3 decades, our continent will see his population double. Less than 30 years. Actually, already now, our leaders are struggling to find infrastructure. Okay. So struggling to create infrastructures. And therefore, they're looking for partners. So in search of partners, they're working with everybody. You know this picture. So, and there is a debate. Who is the right partner for our continent? Who is the ideal partner? So I don't want to waste time with that. It appears, according to discussion, that China is too present in our continent, dominant. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not qualified to discuss about who is the best partner. I just want to say thank you to the World Bank to having given me this opportunity to talk to you. And thank to all those that get me here. So I was born in this village, Gando, Burkina Faso. It's a poor village. And I grew up with that kind of architecture. And I went to school. This is my classroom. I sat with more than 150 other kids. And it was have the dream to make things better. So it doesn't took me long, thanks to this school, that I grabbed a scholarship to go to Germany to study. It was great that the German government gave me this opportunity. I started, and I found Germany was a paradise. So I decided to do my high school degree when I was 30 years old. I did it, and I started to study architecture. And, after 2 years, I had the feeling I had enough. I was good. So I wanted to go back home and create a school in my village. So I went back home to create the primary school of Gando. I told to my people, if you want to create something that is good for us, is to use the material we know the best, which is clay. And I convinced, let me say, I happened to convince my community to help build the school. And so we did it. So even older men, our older men, they are great, and we don't let them be. The women for sure. What I applied was a technology. I was using clay, the same clay that my people knew. I added cement to create bricks that look like you can see. And we built this school out of mud, rebars, and metal sheet as a roofing. Inside, I create the ceiling. All material from 100 meters. From 100 meters from the side. I applied even so-called primitive techniques in the classroom. And I get the community work. Someone said here today is the minister from Ghana, about great things about the women. This is true. If the women stand behind you, you will always succeed. So the women in Gando help create a clay floor. It helped us save money. But what I was doing is to try to get people to touch the material, you know, even techniques, to create a simple vault using the same bricks. And I will jump on the top of every single mock-up to show to my people, guys, it is working. And so people trust in techniques. And so we could build, we keep building, creating shapes of building inside, looking good for the people and creating comfort for the kids. It doesn't take long. People realized what we was doing was something unique. And so they approached me to ask if I can help them do their project. So while doing the project, we still need infrastructures in Gando. Here, a library. So I'm looking always for alternative in the continent. Here, clay pots that I will use to create openings, you know, for ventilation and light inside a library. Kids can sit there and use books in a very safe environment. Teachers has their little corner. So this is my village today. It's still growing. You have to know that I was raising the fund to do it at the beginning. Now I can work somewhere else and bring the money. What I don't have is time to invest anymore in the village. Money is not a big issue. And so left, you see the primary school where it's already green. And then lower, you see there is a high school that I'm still building. And you see what I'm doing as an effort to create greenery, create an oasis, planting trees. It's not just building, it's creating a place that are comfortable for kids to stay. I'm planting trees, the way you can see, and then I'm trying to save what nature is giving to us because we are almost at the middle of the desert. And so other people then push me, asking me to do their project. And every time I have time, I'll go to do. Here, a little example. In this project, we started with the high school degree, high school building, and now it has become a campus, a BIT, they call it, Burkina Institute of Technology. Of course, learning from the US. Why not? But then, built with material from Burkina Faso. Look at laterite. This is the way we extract it. A naturally available material, but rejected sometimes because we don't know how to improve it. And I'm using it. We cut it to make it look modern, but it's regular. And then with my team, we decided to use available wood to create a facade. Let's call it brise soleil, creating a shape that will protect the buildings against heat. And so women will be here. It's not anymore Gando. At the beginning, people were saying it is because it is a community. This place, Kudugu, is about 300 kilometers far from my village. But look at same picture. Getting people to touch the material, to put hand, to create the structure. And again, women on the construction site. They will use the wood to create facade, and the leftover will be used by myself and my team to create chairs and benches. No plastic. No plastic. Classrooms where the kids will be happy to learn. Or for the BIT, for the university, you have a shape that protects against overheating, but then you have a courtyard where the kids can perform, can stay, protected against dust, you know, and every other thing that can be negative. And so this is this campus. So honestly to you guys, ladies and gentlemen, if I'm looking back to that, I feel that I'm creating, or let me say I'm putting light in places where there was no opportunities. This is my work. And because I had a chance to do, and if Africa is not giving me a job, what I do to warm up, I go to the US. I see a lot of material. Here, a pavilion in Montana, very cold, and in a rich nation, one of the dominating nations. And your brother, me, Francis, went there to create a little pavilion using what is available and the technology and the money to create a structure that is capable to stay a hot summer, but also the winter. You know, it's not just mud. It is to show you that looking what is available, you could use it to shape people's dreams. Here, this pavilion serves as a concert for the visitors, but also a place to relax. And it's not just in the US. Very quickly showing you what I was able to do using also technology, knowledge and money in London. Just those projects allowed me to earn money and to go back to Gando and keep building. That's why I'm showing you them. As a Serpentine Pavilion in Kensington Garden, it is the highly great place in London. Your brother was able to create this structure there because he is privileged. Because he's privileged like all of you here, I have to use it because
I know. اگه وقتی پسند جان فرار کنه جلوشو بگیر. All the merrier. بالا منتشر. Focus.
to shape, the future of our continent.
No, this one can't wait. Come upstairs.
Since I was a student.
Well, you just tell me when to stop.
Which is so clean.
Fucking personal life, all right? What personal life?
Even a group of people that normally will not go to the
I worry about you, Tom. Maybe if you open your mind, you could find some peace, too. I sure did.
Maybe because of the quality of the building. Maybe because we did it ourselves. I don't know. But however, in every of these projects, I'm integrating little ideas. Here, housing for a doctor that will come to visit. I try to mimic the way people give a size to their building and build little tiny houses. So people will come, and by the way, they will look at and potentially learn from it and go to improve their own housing. And inside, you have a little, very clean room where you even have a toilet. You know, brothers and sisters, friends from around the world, you know. In a rural area, if you have a house and there is inside a toilet, it is a great luxury. And that's what I'm able to do in the rural area. And now I'm being called to even be involved in buildings that represent the pride of nations. Here, for example, the Parliament House of Benin, where I'm learning from nature, applying traditions in Africa, l'arbre à palabre, the palaver tree, where we sit together to talk. Learning from that, I'm creating a huge Parliament House, which is now under construction. So, ladies and gentlemen, the first building that I built as a student, has been selected 2 years ago as one of the 21 building, much relevant building first since the Second World War. One of 21. One of those buildings is the Sydney Opera that you know. My building cost that time less than $50,000 US, 22 years ago. And the Sydney Opera cost more than 150 million. It took me 6 months with my people to build the school in Gando. And the Sydney Opera took more than a decade. Africa is rich, ladies and gentlemen. So you may say, okay, I must be proud. Of course, I do. I do. But what I want to tell you, it's the fact that my work has this big recognition is giving me the courage to talk to you. And to say, I fought to create my work. And you may consider it as a little drop of water in the desert, in the face of what our continent needs. I may agree with you, but I'm telling you, if you take decision which allow that kind of initiative, project to happen, you will create a lot of drops of water that even will be able to transform a desert in a rainforest. So I want to tell you, it depends on you to support that kind of initiative. If you do so, you will contribute to develop wealth in Africa, and so to contribute to develop the wealth in the world, because we depend on each other. Thank you very much. Yes, yes, Africa can.
Distinguished delegates, a bigger round of applause. And just to add up a little bit on his profile, he is recognized globally for his pioneering approach to designs and sustainable modes of construction. His vocation to become an architect comes from a personal commitment to serve the community where he grew up, as we've seen on his presentation. And he believes in the transformative potential of beauty, looking onto what surrounds you, looking onto what you have. Just as when I look at everyone here, I see how bright the future of Africa is. So let's give ourselves a bigger round of applause. Thank you very much. So we're going now on to a session that is going to look onto the skills for the jobs of the future. Skills for the job of the future. And to moderate this plenary, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, to the stage is already on the stage. So please come to the stage. Mr. Sam Nganga, a bigger round of applause. Karibu sana. And he will also introduce his panel. Karibu Sam. Thank you so much. So as the stage is putting up the additional chair, Sam will be introducing the panelists, but as I would also like to say a word about him, Sam is an upstream manager for manufacturing, agribusiness, and services at the International Finance Corporation, the private sector investment arm of the World Bank Group. Over to you, Sam. Asante sana.
Thank you very much, and I am aware that we are running a little bit behind time, so the private sector is renowned for being efficient, so we will try to be efficient. We have quite an impressive panel with us today, and I'll call them up, and hopefully they'll quickly come up to stage. First, we have two representatives from the governments of Egypt and the government of Algeria, who will give us a perspective from the policy side on how to get skills and reskilling for jobs of the future. So if I could invite the Honorable Reda Hegazi, Minister of Education and Technical Education from the government of Egypt. Please give him a hand. Okay, thank you. And then I'd like to invite the Minister Yassine Walid from the government of Algeria, where he's the Minister for Startups and Micro-Enterprises. Excellent. And then I'd like to invite Ms. Claude Bonner, who is the Managing Director and Chief Investment Officer for Seme City Development Agency in Benin. We have quite a good representation from across the continent. Welcome, Claude. And Mr. Peter Materu, who leads, is the Chief Program Officer for MasterCard Foundation, and I believe I see him coming up. Welcome, Peter. From Ethiopia, we have Ms. Samrawit Fikru, who is the CEO of Ride Ethiopia, a ride-hailing business in Ethiopia. Welcome, Samrawit. And from Kenya, Mr. J. Michoma, HR Director from Avenue Healthcare. And finally, and definitely not least, representing Tanzania is Mr. Benjamin Fernandez, who is the founder and CEO of Nala Money, one of the biggest fintech businesses, he told me, in Africa, so in Tanzania and in Africa. So we're going to try and run through this as efficiently as we can. And the purpose of this panel is to explore how do you translate all these issues we've been talking about, human capital development, into the people that actually do the work, right? So you have students who are in the education system and who will soon be making their way into the workplace. You have adults who are already in the workplace, and how do we respond to the changes that we are seeing as a result of new technologies, as a result of machine learning, as a result of artificial intelligence. As the architect who was just up here said, Africa is rich. Africa is rich in human capital, but we need to channel that human capital into actual results in the workplace and in jobs. So that is our task. We have a few minutes, so we'll try and run very quickly. I hope everybody has got a mic. And Minister Wasini, if I may start with you, actually, if that is okay. The question we would like you to address is, from where you sit, and I should have mentioned that you're both a representative of a government, but also in your individual capacity, you've been a founder in the tech space, so this is an area that is very familiar to you. But from where you sit, how do you see the private sector ensuring that we're developing the right skills for employability across Africa?
Thank you for the question. Let me start by giving you a small overview of the education system in Algeria and the training sector in general. In Algeria, we have more than 12 million people between the primary and the secondary schools, 1.5 million students in the universities, and we have 250,000 new graduates every year. In total, we have more than a third of the Algerian population which is currently in the school. So Algeria has been investing a lot in its education system since its independence. And just to give you an idea of the amount of investment that has been done, back in 1962, after the Algerian, 500 students in the universities in Algeria. Today, there are more than 1,500,000 students, and in totally free educational system, which is today investing more in high-quality education, but also in the new technological trends. Very recently, we launched an artificial intelligence school, a nanotechnology school, and hopefully the Algerian universities will be providing for the labor sector in Algeria qualified, high-skilled engineers for the next challenges our economy will be facing. Algeria, since the last 3 years, has been also implementing public policies aimed at building in knowledge-based 2013. Currently, it's about 1%. We want also companies to invest more in hiring highly skilled personnel, researchers, engineers. We are doing great efforts in terms of tax incentives to encourage companies to hire highly skilled people to work more with the university. And speaking about the university, our university is now much and more connected to the economy by creating incubators inside the economy for startups, by also having a entrepreneurship and programming. And there are maybe two things I wanted to point out, which in my opinion are very important to consider in a quickly changing trends will be